Hello everyone, I'm Naveen Agarwal and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome all of you to my weekly video update. If you are new to my YouTube channel or you are watching my video for the very first time, let me tell you a little bit about what I cover in these videos. My interest is in the medical device industry specifically, and I talk about topics related to quality, regulatory, and risk management. But lately, I have been very focused on COVID-19 related topics such as vaccines, diagnostics, and treatment options. It's an area of big interest to us, and a lot of things are happening fast. There are many videos you can find on my YouTube channel related to these topics. Now, you may be wondering, so Naveen, what is the big deal? What is different about your videos? Great question. What I want you to understand is that I look into the technical literature, published technical literature about these topics, and review that information given my background in the industry and my expertise. And I analyze to give you more actionable insights. You see, what you hear in the news tends to be just top line, and in my opinion, it does little than to just elevate our level of anxiety. It gives a lot of recommendations. Sometimes they conflict with each other. We don't know what to do. So what I like to do in these videos is to give you a little bit more in-depth analysis based on my experience and expertise. So I hope you would enjoy that and you would find that a little bit more insightful so you can take informed decisions for you and your family. And I hope you will consider subscribing to my YouTube channel so that you can stay informed about these very important topics. Now, those of you who have been watching me regularly and are subscribers to my channel, I want to thank you. I really appreciate your questions, your comments, and your inquiries. Just the level of interest gives me so much inspiration to continue producing this content for you on a weekly basis. So I really appreciate your engagement with me on that front. Okay. So we have some great news, right? FDA has now authorized for emergency use a third vaccine for COVID-19. This vaccine comes from Johnson & Johnson. In full disclosure, Johnson & Johnson is one of my clients, and I have worked there for many years in my past professional life. Having said that, I have no direct contact with their pharmaceutical division, Janssen, where this vaccine was developed and launched. So I have no inside information. Whatever I'm going to talk about is based on publicly available information. Specifically, the report that FDA published just prior to the review of the data package for emergency use authorization. It's a 60-70 page long report, a lot of technical details. So I have reviewed that and I'm going to talk about that report in a summary way in this particular video. So let's first talk about a few questions that we are going to focus on. You might have heard that this vaccine has slightly lower efficacy than the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine. So is that a problem? We'll talk about that. Then what is the difference between this vaccine and the other two? Third, how long the effect of the vaccine will last? How long will you have protection when you get the vaccine? That just doesn't apply to this one. It applies to everything else. And it's a good question because we are worried about the variants, right? Different variants coming up. And finally, should you wait to get a specific vaccine if some other vaccine is being offered to you right now? That's also a good question to ask. So we'll discuss all those. Okay, number one, what is the difference? Let's talk about that first. Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are what they call messenger RNA vaccines. And again, you will find more videos on my channel that go into a lot more detail. The idea is to basically design an RNA molecule that will prompt our system, our immune system, to produce antibodies to the spike protein of coronavirus. That's what they're trying to do. The key difference in the J&J vaccine is that it is actually a DNA vaccine and it's based on what they call a viral vector. In this case, they have used adenovirus, which is a common cold virus, all the time available. Mild common cold is what it causes. So they have taken that virus, deactivated it, and introduced a new DNA which has a gene specifically designed to produce the spike protein in our system. So difference is DNA, which means that when another point to remember here is that the virus cannot replicate itself. So one particle acts only once, and that's a very important difference to understand. So when the viral particle goes inside our cells, the DNA actually enters the nucleus of our cells. Now it kicks into the cellular machinery into action, and that creates the spike protein. So the end result is the same. Both mRNA vaccine and this DNA based vaccine, the end result is the same, that they are both trying to stimulate our immune system to produce antibodies to the spike protein. That's what they're trying to do. Okay, so let's talk about efficacy, right? You might have heard in the news that it has an overall efficacy of 66%, which is definitely lower than the 95% efficacy, 90 to 95% efficacy we heard about from Moderna and Pfizer. So should that be a concern? Point number one, let me remind you that when we had no vaccines, FDA set the standard at 50%, and that flu vaccines are typically effective in that range. So their baseline expectation was about 50%. Having said that, there are some nuances to this 66% efficacy. Okay, first of all, this is overall efficacy. 14 days after dose 1, and it's only one dose, not the 2 doses like the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. So only one dose given on day 1, and they are looking at what happens by day 14 and by day 28. How many cases of COVID are reported in the vaccine group versus the placebo group. And this phase 3 trial had about 40,000 people. More importantly, about 44% were from the United States, 40% from Latin America, and about 16% from South Africa. And the time frame in which this trial was conducted was when coronavirus was rampant in all these geographies, and different variants were in action. So it was done at a different time compared to Pfizer and Moderna vaccine trials. Okay, and it was geographically dispersed. So what I'm going to tell you is a breakdown of their efficacy by region. It's very insightful to look at that. So if you look at the US, only US based cases and where the vaccine was given versus placebo, their efficacy is around 72%, not the overall 66%. And remember, close to 44% of the trial participants were from the US. Now let's talk about South Africa, right? We have heard about a specific variant from South Africa, which has a mutation which is particularly resistant to neutralizing antibodies which are generated from these vaccines, some of these vaccines. That's a concern. In that environment, the efficacy was still 52%, higher than the 50%. So efficacy is lower, but these are, I believe, more real world numbers, compared to the kind of short-term point-based estimates that we heard, 90 to 95%. Now, those vaccines are also proving to be pretty effective overall. Tens of millions of people have been vaccinated, and we are still not hearing cases of reinfections, right? So they are proving to be quite effective, but this particular vaccine is also, we should not think about this as inferior. In fact, given the circumstances under which this vaccine was tested in phase 3 trials and different geographies with different variants being present in those geographies, these numbers are actually pretty good. Of special interest to us should be the efficacy against severe disease. Now that's a subset of the data. Okay, so that severe disease efficacy against severe COVID disease, which might require hospitalization or ICU or even death, is about 77% or even 80% given, depending upon the time frame after the vaccination is given. So those are good numbers, right? And when you look at serious events like deaths, there is some indication, overall mortality. There are some positive indications that this vaccine may prove to be efficacious against that. Now, the level of confidence against mortality data is low. So we are not going to talk about too much. But bottom line is this: the efficacy is high enough. It's real. It's high against the variants which are proving to be particularly resistant. It is significantly high against severe COVID-19 cases, and it's showing positive indication towards mortality reduction. These are very impressive results. Now, we have talked about the fact that this is a single shot vaccine. One thing, before I forget, point out, they did earlier trials in which they tested both a single dose and 2 dose, and a low dose and a high dose. Now, those are interim results that I talked about before, and we still are going to wait for efficacy data. But they are conducting a phase 3 clinical trials with 30,000 patients that will receive 2 doses of the low dose amount. So we will know if a second dose will produce a significant boost in efficacy afterwards or not. My expectation is that it would, or it'll prolong the effect of the vaccine, but that data will come. So it is a single dose vaccine, right? But more importantly, because DNA vaccines are more stable than mRNA vaccines, they do not require ultra cold freezing temperatures. So this can be stored at 2 to 8 degrees centigrade like normal refrigeration temperatures. And as a result, access to this vaccine and distribution of this vaccine will be very broad, not only within the United States, but across the world. So that's also another benefit. So I think there is a nuance to the efficacy story, right? And we should not be too concerned by the fact that just this 66% appears too low compared to the 90-95%. We should understand a little bit deeper what it means. That's the purpose of making this video for you. Okay? Now let's talk about some of the safety concerns, right? We want to talk about both safety and efficacy. From the safety perspective, what they are reporting, solicited adverse events 7 days after the vaccine is given, similar to what other people have reported, and similar effects. Local effects like injection site pain, swelling, some inflammation or pain, nothing major. And systemic issues like fatigue, fever, muscle pain, at a fairly high frequency, but consistent with all other different types of vaccines that are already out there. So nothing different, similar. Now, serious adverse events over a period of time are also being collected, and they tend to be around 0.4%. And it's similar to what they see in the placebo group as well. So there's no reason to believe that these serious adverse events are out of balance compared to the placebo group. And they are occurring at a lower rate. Now, 0.4%, when you multiply that by tens of millions of people receiving the vaccine, could still be high. So we have to keep an eye on that. We have to monitor to figure out exactly what the adverse events are, specifically what the adverse events are, and make sure that those patients are treated timely and very quickly. But overall, it is in the same ballpark as other vaccines, nothing major. In terms of deaths, there was 1 death reported in the vaccine group for this particular vaccine, and that was found to be not related to COVID-19. Most of the deaths occurred in the placebo group, and they were related to COVID-19, and some of them were also not related to COVID-19. And based on that data is what they are estimating, that there might be a positive effect, overall positive effect on overall mortality. But as I mentioned before, the level of confidence is low. So we talked a lot about safety and efficacy. I hope it answered some of your questions, but if you still have lingering questions and doubts, please send me a note. You can write a comment as part of this video or engage with me on LinkedIn. Okay, we also wanted to talk about how long will the effect of the vaccine last. Now, we are still collecting information on that, right? But we have some proxy data that we can use to understand. I talked about this interim data in a lot more detail on this J&J vaccine in another video. But what they did in their phase 1, phase 2 trials was monitor the level of neutralizing antibodies over time after the vaccine was given. And they are reporting that up to 70 days, at least up to 70 days at that time, the level of neutralizing antibodies was pretty high and stable. No reason to believe that it will go down tremendously right after that. But at least up to 70 days, we have data to know that the system will have antibodies. And they also showed, interestingly, that when you give the second dose, the level of neutralizing antibodies just jumps. So we have reason to believe that when the second dose, 2-dose data will be published, we should see a boost in overall efficacy. And that will be like apples to apples comparison between Pfizer, Moderna and J&J vaccine, right? Right now we are just comparing 1 dose versus 2 doses. And even that, the story looks pretty good. Final question. Should you wait? Should you tell people, hey, I want only J&J, or I definitely don't want J&J, I want Pfizer, or I want Moderna, no matter what they are offering you in your area? According to the public health officials, this is not the right approach. All of these vaccines are highly efficacious and they have good safety record. So the recommendation is you take the vaccine that is first available. Like going to a restaurant, if it is completely packed and it's your favorite restaurant, you ask for first available table, right? Even though that may not be your favorite place to sit on. Here's the reason why they are saying that. They're saying that we need to vaccinate as many people as quickly as possible, because number one reason why we are worried about the variants is because we have too much virus in our communities. If we break the chains of transmission, if we do not allow the virus to mutate, we will not have as many variants. So we need to vaccinate as many people as quickly as possible. So I would not wait for a specific vaccine. I would not reject a vaccine that is being offered to you just because it might look slightly lower in the numbers. I would not do that. So I hope you will make that decision, and as soon as a vaccine is available, you go get the vaccine and help contribute to this effort of slowing down COVID-19, and just we've been at it for too long. Okay, so in summary, vaccine efficacy overall appears lower, but when you dig deeper, these efficacy numbers are actually not low. They are in the context of the time frame in which the trial was conducted and the geographies where the variants were dominant. Those efficacy numbers are looking good, and what I call them not low, I call them real. These are real efficacy numbers. Safety profile looks very good. Vaccine effect, we have data to show at least 70 days, definitely more than that by the proxy data that I talked about from a neutralizing antibodies perspective. And 2-dose trial is going on. So we anticipate that data to become available soon. Johnson & Johnson has also announced that they will be doing trials in teenagers, like 12 to 8. That's great interest to me because my kids are 14-year-old and there's no vaccine available for them. So there'll be more trials in the pediatric population. And they're also thinking about doing trials for pregnant women and infants, which is all very good news. So we talked about making the right decision to take the first vaccine available as soon as possible. I hope you will consider that. Okay, so we talked about a lot of things and I hope this is useful to you. Please share your opinion, especially if you disagree with me. I would love to hear your viewpoint. I love to learn from each other, and I fully acknowledge I do not have all the answers. And it is through conversation and dialogue that we improve our collective understanding. So I hope you will consider engaging and sharing your honest opinion with me. I look forward to hearing from you, and all of you, please stay safe in these very difficult circumstances.